We had 200 something in Steamboat last night, which was,
Wow.
yeah. Pam draws a crowd up there. It was fun.
Steamboat is my Brooklyn, I like to say.
Brooklyn. Well, I don't know what Moab is for you, but we love you here.
Well, I love Moab. In fact, Moab was the very last place I was. I was there on March 10th. In fact, I read it Back of Beyond on March 10th, and it was packed, and we all hugged and slobbered all over each other and kissed and shook hands and traded off books. And then I read with my friend Ginger Gaffney. And then we had a reading up in Salt Lake on the Tuesday following that Friday, and no one came. That was the weekend that we all went home. Yeah. But Moab was the last place I was. The last restaurant I sat inside was in Moab, the wonderful pho place. And so many things. But no, Moab has been a place of my heart for decades and decades.
Well, Pam Houston, I'm really glad that you have some red sand in your shoes from Moab and a little bit in the, in the soul as well. I read that reading at Back of Beyond Books, and am ever so grateful for their co-presentation of this very evening as we kind of slide and segue into the big hello to everybody who's here. Hi. And
hello.
Yeah, hi from Amy Irvine and Mary at the Moab Museum and myself, Christy Williams Dutton and Pam Houston. It's Tuesdays with the museum for the Moab Museum. And I'm Christy Williams Dutton. I'll be your host tonight. We're so glad you could make it to this live storytelling event, co-presented again by our esteemed friends at Back of Beyond Books, specializing in regional and natural history, titles of the Colorado Plateau. And a big hello to Back of Beyond Books, Andy and Marcy, who I think are in the audience, and also maybe Sherry Zollinger, who.
Oh, Sherry too. Hello, I miss you guys so much.
We're ever so grateful for their role in keeping words flowing on the page here in this region of the country. And, the big stories told through our small museum are stories of community and people across the Colorado Plateau living as our region's natural and cultural history. As such, we're excited to share a treat this evening, an intimate look at the momentous time we're living in through the exchanges that accidentally became a book that is tearing it up, saying the truth. Airmail, letters of politics, pandemics, and place. We're excited that Zoom and Facebook simulcast allows us to keep on having these conversations in spite of the pandemic. And if you're new to Zoom, of course, we can't see you like you can see us, but we want your feedback so much. And so please feel free to submit questions or comments that you might have via the chat feature bottom of your screen. And there's Mary, who handles membership and community outreach at the museum. She's behind the Moab. Thank you, Mary. And she's going to be monitoring those. We're going to have lots of time for a conversation at the end. And with all of the lights assembled here this evening, I'm sure I can feel it already, an illuminating and nourishing exchange. So hang out and potluck curiosity, joy, wisdom, all of that absolutely wanted. So you can send it to us as the panelists or individuals, or so everybody can see. You can also raise hand. There's a feature, and you can look at that at the bottom of your screen. Now, the authors. Pam Houston is the author of a memoir, Deep Creek, Finding Hope in the High Country, as well as 2 novels, Contents May Have Shifted and Sighthound, Also, two collections of short stories, one very near and dear to my heart called Cowboys Are My Weakness and Waltzing the Cat. Also a collection of essays, a little more about me. She teaches in the low-res MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts, a very cool gig, and is a professor of English at UC Davis. Co-founder, a literary nonprofit called Writing by Writers, and lives 9,000 feet above sea level near the headwaters of the Rio Grande in Creede. Thank you, Pam, and of course, Amy Irvine. And Amy is a sixth generation Utahn and longtime public lands activist. She's the author of Desert Cabal, A New Season in the Wilderness, and her memoir, Trespass, just a lacerating and really deep look at living at the edge of the promised land. It received the Orion Book Award and the Ellen Malloy Desert Writers Award and the Colorado Book Award as well. She teaches an MFA program of Southern New Hampshire University over there at Southern New Hampshire University and lives and writes in Southwest Colorado, very nearby, just as what she would call spitting distance from the Utah homelands. And so both of these authors live at least one high mountain pass apart from one another, but they live near and dear to my heart for a whole host of reasons, not least of which is their deeply synchronized accompaniment of my own desert life. It's their full-bodied expression, both in print and in real life. And it is a true honor to introduce and hand over to Pam and Amy for an exchange of airmail letters. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I guess I'll start. It's wonderful to be here. I was saying sometime while we were coming on the air that Moab is a place that, gosh, it will always be near and dear to my heart. I worked as a river guide in all of southeastern Utah for many years when I was younger. I still managed to get back there for an extended period of time, at least once a year, if not more. And in fact, I was there with a group of women who are my students, and we get together someplace wonderful at least once a year. And we were in Moab right when the pandemic hit. We were in Moab the second week of March, and I read at Back of Beyond. We had a wonderful night at Back of Beyond on March 10th, I believe. I was reading from Deep Creek, and Ginger Gaffney was there reading from her wonderful book, Half Broke. And it was such a wonderful night. And then everything shut down. It was the last hurrah was in Moab. So that's, anyway, it's a wonderful place and a wonderful town and wonderful for the arts. And of course, public lands and the beauty of the natural world in the desert Southwest. So wonderful to be here. I've never done a Moab Museum thing before, so very excited about that too. Anyway, all of that aside, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how airmail became. The editor of Orion magazine, Sumanth Prabhakar, who, if you haven't looked at Orion magazine lately, is doing amazing things as editor of Orion magazine. He, right as soon as the pandemic began, he called Amy and asked her if she would be part of a series they had decided to do during the pandemic called Together Apart. And in that series, two writers would write to one another and talk about the pandemic or talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And Amy was going to be the initiating writer in that series. And Sumanth asked her who she might want to write with. And Amy and I had never met. And it's kind of crazy that we had never met because we hang out in all the same places and we know a lot of the same people. And we share a lot of passions and places, crazy number of coincidences, really, it turns out, that we're still realizing. But in any case, we had never met. I was introduced to Amy's work when our mutual friend Craig Childs asked if I would look at Desert Cabal with an eye to writing some words about it. And I read Desert Cabal in Galley and was completely moved and thrilled about it, thrilled about the conversation. And I'm a great believer that real love is complicated love. So this love letter to Edward Abbey that took him on and challenged him, in addition to showing gratitude for him. And I thought it was smart and fierce and ferocious and all the things I admire. So I did write a quote, and but we still didn't meet. And just that morning that Sumant Prabhakar called Amy, we had this little exchange on Facebook. We follow each other on Facebook, and Amy had written this beautiful paragraph about being in quarantine with her husband and daughter. And I saw it and I was so moved by it, just the beauty of the paragraph really, and the beauty of the feeling in it. And so I reposted it and I said, this is the truest paragraph I've read since this thing began. And then, 15 minutes after I posted it, I thought, oh, that was kind of personal. And I don't actually know her. And you know how Facebook is. And maybe I should check with her. So I sent her a Facebook message and I said, I just reposted what you said about your husband and daughter, and I hope that's okay. It's kind of personal. And Amy wrote back and she said, oh, Pam, it's all personal now, isn't it? And I was so moved by that. And that really made me want to know her. In any case, the coincidence of that happening on the day Sumant called led Amy to suggest me. And I was very eager to start writing letters. And the assignment was about 3,000 or 3,500 words. So that turned out to be about 6 letters. And we wrote those letters kind of in the naive days of the pandemic, very aware of our own privilege, very aware that we could work from home and that we had millions of acres of public lands at our disposal that we could walk out into. And yet grappling with some of the bigger ramifications of this and its relationship to injustice and the climate collapse we're in and all kinds of other things. So our letters started to edge that way. And once we turned them in to Orion, it became very clear to us that these letters were a thing we were looking forward to, every few days, and that they were kind of saving our sanity, and that we had this way to speak to another woman who felt, literally as abused by the current administration as the earth was being. And it was just like finding a sister, across the miles and through these words. And we didn't meet all that time. We never talked on the phone. In fact, the first time we really sort of laid eyes on each other was at the editorial meeting, a few months later, but I'm going to let Amy tell that part of the story. So we wrote and we held each other up, and we took turns having terrible days, and we took turns with our rallying cries to each other about letting the women be in charge and maybe saving the planet. It's a big ambition, but someone's got to have it. And all of a sudden we had 35,000 words, and it was somewhere in there where we said, this is something, this is a record of these times and maybe something more. And now I'll turn it over to Amy.
Well, first I want to say how this is perhaps the most meaningful Zoom event I will do, because Southeastern Utah is where my heart lives. And Andy Nettle of Back and Beyond Books, neither of my books preceding this one would be in print, would have ever been written without Andy's support and his vision and his standing by me when things got hard. And and cheering me on and finding me my great-great-great-grandfather's diary. And I mean, there's so many ways I'm grateful to Andy that I'll just start sobbing if I name them all. So Andy, Marcy, I love you guys. I'm so glad you're here tonight. And then Christy, oh my God. Christy was the first person to, when Ruby was in the womb, she walked up behind me. We'd never met. She didn't know who I was because she walked up behind me and came around me looking at my belly and said, oh my God, hang on to your hat because that kid is coming in hot. And she was the first one to peg Ruby for what she is. And then she married Devin and me on the banks of the Colorado River in the most meaningful, magical ceremony I could ever imagine. And yeah, so Moab's always a homecoming for me. And it's such a joy to be here with Pam after having forged this sisterhood that has been one of the most important things about this entire year, if not the entire decade. Pam and I can't believe that we haven't met before now. We had to look up the term because we know there's a bromance, like that got a lot of airtime, but we didn't know what that was called and it turns out it's a womance if women develop that kind of friendship. So we've been having a womance that is long overdue. And we figured that the only reason we didn't meet before now is perhaps we had to save up everything that would come together in the two of us for 2020. And so whatever small, meaningful way we can be a part of a sea change, that's why we took the book to the next level, which is to pick up where Pam just left off and say that we kept writing and the letters just became more and more important as the death toll mounted, as more and more of democracy's most fundamental ideals were being disintegrated by the administration. And particularly things like the Clean Air Act, which looms large in this book, the dismantling of public lands protections in particular. So there was a lot to worry about and become increasingly horrified and angry about and fearful about. And so the letters intensify over time. And at some point around 30,000 words, we were like, we have something here, don't we? What is it? It was sort of like an unplanned pregnancy where you're like, okay, there's a baby coming. We don't know what it looks like or what its name is or when it was this huge surprise and we knew it was coming into the world. So Pam said, well, gosh, I can't imagine anybody in New York getting it out on time. What do you think? And I said, I know who can do this, and it's Torrey House Press. They, along with Back and Beyond, Sherry Zollinger and Andy Nettle in particular, were the forces that brought Desert Cabal into the world under extraordinary circumstances. And some of you know that story, but I just knew that they would be up for it if there was anybody who could pull it off. So I called Kirsten Allen, publisher and editor at Torrey House in Salt Lake. Their mission is clear, Voices for the Land. It's all women. And I said, I've been writing letters with Pam Houston. It's been really amazing. We think it's a book and we wanted to publish it before the election. Like, we think it could actually be a galvanizing kind of tool because people are feeling so disheartened, and these letters lifted us up. Maybe they'll help other people too. And she was like, wait a minute, there's a pandemic going on. All eyes are on the election. There's no money. Like, are you insane? And I said, look, let me just say, let me read you a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit more. And by the end of the conversation, she just said, yes, of course. They didn't stop. They kept saying yes. They kept saying yes against all kinds of odds. And we still had never met. That's the crazy thing, is that the book went into production before we even met. And that was by chance, really, that we both ended up in Santa Fe at the same time, like for our first breakout from the stay-at-home orders. And that was a really amazing meeting because it spoke to the true power of letters, in that We sat out on the porch of the motel that Ruby and her new service dog and I were staying in. The service dog was coming for its first sleepover for a test drive. She is a seizure alert dog and her work is mostly at night. So we were having a sleepover. Pam brings over green chili, cheeseburgers and milkshakes, and the dog and the girl went to bed, and the two women had their womounts out on the patio of the El Rey Motor Court. And we talked late into the night, and there wasn't ever like even an awkward moment or sort of a fill in the gap kind of thing. And that really struck me as such an extraordinary thing in an era of fast messages and emojis and, you know, all that stuff, that the letters were so sustaining on such a deep level. So, yeah, we can read to you. We, since we and Tory House Press have broken convention in every possible way. I mean, this is a book that really shouldn't have happened. We're going to break it once again and read our last 4 letters instead of something at the beginning or the middle, and in part because they feel that the ones with the most eye on the election, and it feels like that's what we all need right now. As we said, there are times that we fall apart in our letters, and this is my letter of falling apart. April 25th, 2020. Hey, Pam. Today I'm in a place beyond my custom fit anger, grief, indignation, and despair. I am disarticulated, especially in writing, because I cannot find words or story or metaphor. There are no nouns. There is no body to embody. Abstractions apply because I feel so dislocated, adrift. This is the case everywhere but in our letters. It's like I'm sliding in sideways. I know you love baseball. I'm sliding in sideways to home plate, and the sliding, the arriving, is perpetual. There's knowing a ball is being thrown and it may shatter my skull from behind or make the catcher's mitt before I get there, but it's all suspended and I'm sliding and don't know that I'll ever slide safely into home base again. I don't know any other way to write right now. I don't know how to tell a story. I don't have language. Everything is about breath. I am so scared because there is a shortage of asthma inhalers and albuterol vials for the nebulizer that Ruby and I both use when we get the bad chest colds or flu that turns into pneumonia, which we did have just before this book. The doctors now are pretty sure we had COVID because I had been in Mongolia just before things hit here and I brought it home with me. I also have the worst allergies. I've never really had them until 2 summers ago when the fires were so bad. And now I just can't breathe. The more I learn about the way this virus attacks and the people who are most susceptible to it, well, I'm a sitting duck. Then a panic attack hits me like that baseball, and then the wind's knocked right out of me. I've been a fearless activist. I've been a bold climber, ranger, wildlands firefighter. I am built for the big risks, the fights that are tooth and nail. But I've stumbled off the battlefield and I'm into a stadium and I'm mixing metaphors. I'm sliding and the ball is coming, the other team is winning, and I'm never going to arrive. I'm never going to know the score. I don't even know what game this is or who the fuck is cheering in the bleachers. Are those Atwood's handmaids that I see with the signs that say my body, my choice, cheering for me as a woman with agency over her body, her writing, her emotional well-being, her right not to be maimed, enslaved, polluted? Or are they the protesters who refuse to wear masks, who won't keep their distance because it feels fascist, when really all we're trying to do is buy time for vaccines and medical equipment to be made? Are these folks truly okay with people dying as long as we save the economy? Must these things be mutually exclusive? I am so gutted. I cannot breathe. And when I'm able to grab a noun, I'm mixing metaphors, baseball and swords. Yesterday, the flycatchers showed up on the little balcony attached to my writing loft, as they do every spring. They like to check in, to say they're back, to remind me they're about to start nest building. I just stood at the door and told them I was sorry. Sorry that they were nesting in a dying world. Then our favorite doe arrived early this morning. She's unmistakable because she has these droopy, floppy ears like a hound dog. I could barely feel joy though, let alone hope. I just had this weird dissociated sense that the deer were in the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong reality, which is a projection, of course, of that feeling in me. This morning, I read in The Guardian that the virus is able to attach to particulates of air pollution, so it can travel a good distance to infect people. Imagine if I get infected here on my mesa and I sneeze while I'm out on the balcony talking to the flycatchers, and this crazy southwestern spring wind carries it all the way to your ranch while you're out on the porch breathing in that scant rain and you get sick. I'm being dramatic, of course, but the point is, this virus is no flu. We live on either side of the continental divide. That was something we became aware of in exchanging letters. I went looking for better news than Washington offered to counter the small groups of hateful lunatics who have been hogging all the airtime. In our own state, police are looking for a man who went into a market in Evergreen and breathed all over the produce. I can't walk back the video footage in my head, and only now that I'm writing to you about it do I realize it's the damn breathing thing again. And then we have some creepy guys who leered at Ruby when we went walking. A while back, I looked at the county sex offender site, and sure enough, we have like 4 of them on the mesa, and at least 1 is registered for having assaulted a child. So doors are locked, blinds get drawn. If anyone invaded, Devin and I are both pretty good with a gun, but that's not the way I want to go about my business. Now Ruby's on third base, and I have to decide whether to urge her to run for home plate too. She's already so scared, angry that her childhood was stolen by epilepsy, and now her teen years have been hijacked by the double whammy of climate catastrophes and a pandemic. She turned sweet 16 in September. She had her whole party planned out. She is also sick of school on Zoom and scared she might die like Charlotte. Charlotte was the poster child for epileptic children whose seizures were managed with CBD oil, and when she got COVID, it triggered such bad seizures that she died from them. Fire season is almost here, and she's terrified of fire every since the time she was little and we almost evacuated when flames came up out of the canyon, leapfrogging at our house at 60 miles an hour. I called my neighbor that day. She was hosing down hay bales and turning horses into the farthest pasture. She said she'd come help me load animals if it came to it. Fortunately, the wind changed, but Ruby's lived in fear since. Oh, the fires. We don't have much time till they're here. And what does that look like with those relentless winds and perhaps sick firefighters and what will amount to little federal funding amid one of the worst droughts the Southwest has ever endured? I'm sorry. I'm not too inspiring today. This is the lowest of low, this place we're in. What dystopia really looks like. Think how long ago that was. I think now about all the books I haven't written and now may never get to. I think about all that I wished for Ruby that didn't happen. I think of how little time I might have with the man I've only known for 5 years and love beyond all measure. I suspect I'll die of global heartbreak paid for by patriarchy, or else I'll die from this virus, which are really one and the same. Who knew we'd be choosing from such stark options? And yet, thank God for those 2 words side by side. I have this time with you. The deer are here, and out of the blue, my mother is shipping me lavender plants to put on the new patio Devin just built, plants that she swears are deer-proof. I am holding my students' feet to the flames, and they are producing some damn good writing in the process. Ruby is pretty stable right now, and that means I'm sleeping, which means whatever I'm sliding into, whatever swords I've got in the fire, they're being forged anew. Someday soon I'll wield them again, because this is all there is now, the battle to just be. Onward, with love, Amy.
April 29th, 2020. Dear Amy, I think we have to take turns with our days of devastation. It is the only way we will get through. It is how women have always gotten through. Going to look for good news on the internet is not a good strategy right now, unless you go back to the rescued pit bulls. I did a Zoom conversation last night with Joe Wilkins and Luis Urea about Joe's novel, Fall Back Down When I Die. Mind you, these are both relatively conscious, sensitive men. Joe's novel is on the one hand an old-fashioned Western with lots of good old boys running around the forest shooting each other and wolves. The novel's climax occurs during the first legal gray wolf hunt in Montana. And on the other hand, a successful attempt to humanize some of those government-hating, gun-loving white dudes who were raised out in eastern Montana by brutal and violent fathers, who were raised by brutal and violent fathers, who were raised by, you get the drift. I blurbed the book 2 years ago when it was in Galley because it is beautifully written and because it did, in fact, make me feel empathy for the protagonist, Wendell. Wendell grew up with every disadvantage except the big one, and over the course of the book gains a conscience and therefore has to die. It is an old story, intelligently and sensitively updated. I spent a few hours yesterday reacquainting myself with the book, and in the penultimate scene where the gun-toting bad men are chasing the gun-toting redeemed man, Wendell, who has his nephew whom he loves like a son and his love interest, Maddie, in tow, he decides they should split up so he can distract the killers and the woman and the little boy can get away. Then there is this paragraph. She nodded and asked where, and he pointed north along the ridge, had her sight along his arm. He made sure she knew what was west, what was east, and to keep herself north, ever north. If she stayed true, he said, and kept the North Star in front of her. I know I don't have to go on for you to catch my drift. And I can't quite remember now whether Maddie grew up in that wild country or how well her backstory would have allowed her to know it. But most of my women friends, and I'm betting yours too, know how to find and follow the fucking North Star. I don't believe there has ever been a study proving a Y chromosome makes one more able to find one's way across a landscape after dark. My point is not to criticize this good novel, nor to make Joe Wilkins, who is anything but the problem, into one. I do seem to be done, however, with this particular mythology where men who know the wilderness so much better than women go out and die in it that the woman might live. It's a pretty story, but the real story of the American West, the one we have been living all our lives, is the bottomless insecurity that leads men to tame and destroy the wilderness, and now millions will die from living downwind from that destruction. We have to fess up to participating in that story before we can write a new one. And this John Wayne shit has to be the first thing to go. I realize this is what Desert Cabal is exactly about. Weirdly, everyone last night, except the female moderator, was surprised when I wanted to talk about the similarity between the guys in the novel and the guys who were concurrently waving their AR-15s around in front of a dozen Capitol buildings across the land, even though the reading series was called On America. The same men who, when I wear a mask into my grocery store, ask me if I am a snowflake. The same men who leer at Ruby and all the girls we love. We have tied ourselves into so many knots to have compassion, understanding, and empathy for those guys. The New York Times alone has devoted thousands of column inches to them and continues to. When have they ever, once in their lives, tried to have compassion for us? We are coming, I am sure of it, to either the end of the letting men be in charge of the world period of history or the end of the human race. This pandemic must be the something's got to give moment. The men have failed the earth and all her inhabitants dramatically because of the weird insecurity absolute power imbues. We need look no further than the monster in chief to see it exaggerated so comically, if only we could laugh. No one who is not alive in this time would or will believe it is possible. Because I am one of the few non-native people who teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts, some students and faculty wish I weren't there. Many more of them respect me, like me, are eager to work with me. A few even befriend me for real. But not one of them will ever really trust me because I am white. I know this is a questionable designation. And white people have been breaking promises and killing their relatives for centuries. 500 years of genocide is the constant refrain there, the de facto explanation for everything. Understanding, accepting, and working from within that truth has been one of the single most important educations of my life. It has also given me a way to understand my current feelings about men, especially straight white men. I recognize there are good ones. I enjoy my time with many of them. I truly love a few of them, but I will never exactly trust them. Not entirely, not anymore. Not even the one I am married to, who is the best straight white man I have ever known. Yesterday, I asked Mike what he would do if a bunch of the men who threatened me on social media came up the driveway to kill me. And the first thing he said was, make myself scarce. It was an astonishing moment in our relationship because what I had always pictured was him going out and talking to them calmly because of his deep belief that they are good people, his Taoist commitment to the middle way. In my fantasy version of this event, I imagine them forgetting in pretty short order why they had come up the driveway in the first place. They would forget me entirely and start talking about the elk they bagged last fall or what a ripoff it is that the Forest Service charges $10 per cord of firewood. Making Mike the enemy is even stupider than doing the same to Joe Wilkins. In the first place, what kind of a feminist am I if what I was looking for was to be saved from the marauders by my man? More to the point, Mike is good and fair and loving and willing and eager to work hard emotionally in ways almost no one in my life experience, man or woman, has been. In all of those things, he is more than my equal, and I feel lucky to have found him every day. But when his first reaction was make myself scarce, it made that distrusting pilot light flare up inside me. And even when he immediately shifted to go out and confront them, I couldn't snuff it out. What I wanted was not so much for Mike to tell me he would blow their heads off, a sentence Mike would never in this lifetime say, but to acknowledge my fear and the possibility that in this red part of Colorado, my scenario is not entirely far-fetched. I'm pretty good with a gun too, though that scenario usually ends in multiple deaths, whereas my driveway fantasy only ends in my erasure. These are our choices under this regime, and maybe the ones that came before. Every time I post or publish something political, I invite those guys to my driveway, and yet I keep posting, which must mean I believe erasure is worse. One thing the pandemic has made crystal clear is exactly how much we are on our own. There is no safety net in this country of any kind, not for women, nor artists, nor educators, nor several of the other things I am. But there's a certain freedom in that, if a twisted one. Bigger freedom in being willing to choose death over erasure, which is how so many Black, Latinx, Native, and Asian writers and activists have lived and continue to live. I would love living in a country that had my back, but since I don't, I feel under no obligation to please anybody. Not the government, nor the patriarchy, nor the publishing industry, nor the New York Times, nor even Mike, if it's at the expense of my own truth. I want to breathe. I want the next generation to be able to breathe and to not be raped and to not be shot. I want to love Mike, my friends, animals, and surrogate family members in a way that is bigger than pleasing. And I want to keep writing these letters. Because the biggest dirty secret of all, one that decades of gaslighting has made it possible for us to keep from ourselves, is this. Women have more power in our little fingers than Mitch McConnell has in his entire ball sack, if he even has a ball sack. Mike Pence didn't need to wear a mask at the Mayo Clinic because he is actually made out of particle board and therefore doesn't have any lungs. I know 50 women personally who could set themselves on fire and fly to the moon if that's what they most wanted. It's the one thing I am most sure about, the largely untapped power of women. The administration is sure about it too. That's why they spend so much energy trying to keep us down. Men have abdicated the right to control our lives, our air, and our water by a combination of incompetence, corruption, greed, and insecurity. Don't fucking tell me where the North Star is, asshole. Give me the sextant for a minute and see how much better things get. In love and rage, Pam.
May Day 2020. Dearest Pam, it's day 51 since we closed our front door to the outer world. It's also May Day, which the naked, naughty pagans who were tortured and killed for loving the natural world called Beltane. It is also almost Mother's Day, and as I mentioned, my mother sent lavender plants. In anticipation of their arrival, Devin and I drove to the nearest garden store 2 river valleys away for a nice blue pot and good soil, among other things. The marquee out front was inviting and said masks were required. Like you, I live in a red part of Colorado, where most folks post Trump 2020 yard signs, but there are a few Trump Jr. 2024 signs too. Like you, there is some eye rolling when we cover our faces at the market or post office, but for the most part, folks in our town are leaving everyone to their own choices. But the garden staff, masked and gloved, was still so accessible and helpful, and still suffered worse. As we paid up and said thanks, one employee with tears in her eyes said, "Thank you for helping us stay healthy, and thank you for not verbally assaulting us. Someone comes in every 20 minutes or so and just screams at us, calls us names, says that because of the mask requirement, they'll never shop here again. We're just trying to stay healthy, keep our jobs, feed our families." Mayday is the call for ships and airplanes in distress. It derives from the French phrase Mayday, or help me. Aidez nous is the plural form, but you probably knew that. That's one of our parallel lives. We both spent time in the French Alps. I worry about our own protests in these letters. There will be counter protests, which is fine. That's what democracy is about. Until the men with guns march up the driveway. That's the antithesis of democracy. And I can barely breathe trying to imagine how this ends. I dreamed last night that an ex had his hands around my throat, a man who in the waking world had done the same. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I woke thinking, they're gunning for a persistent chokehold. Depress our oxygen levels so we aren't clear-headed enough to locate the North Star when it's hanging there in the inkwell of night sky, dazzling as ever. So we can't take in air enough to walk toward it for as many miles as it takes to arrive in a healthier, kinder world. I see clearly now where to go, but I have been so lost. And every time it's because I ignored my instincts and desires and followed some guy into his narrative. There's the boyfriend I took the heat for when he rear-ended another car, and since he didn't have since his driver's license was suspended, he begged me to switch seats before the cops got there. The boyfriend who told a teenage me to smoke something cool, which I did without question, only to learn later it was crack cocaine. There's the therapist who told me to stop writing because he thought I was like Listerine, too blistering, too angry. It's inconceivable to me now that I obeyed. I own my part here, of course. But what staggers is how many men have put me in jeopardy, have used me as a rung on a ladder to get to high ground, and did so without ever asking me how I felt about it. I'm not sure any of them noticed. After all, it's marbled into cells, psyches, society. Just as it's ingrained for women who grow up with a father who pats your 15-year-old ass and tells you that the most important class she'll take in high school is typing, not so you can write books, but so you can get a good secretarial job. But only, he adds, if you keep the weight off those thunderous skier thighs. There are bad guys out there who will read this and say terrible things about us. There will be threats, dismissals, worse. Certainly there will be those who won't consider this real writing. But even a lot of the good guys out there will read this and bristle, push back, and dismiss the fact that sexism is a condition of maleness, just as racism is a condition of whiteness, something we should be looking out for, apologizing for, and making amends for the rest of our lives. Those with the wealth and entitlement inherited from forefathers who built fortunes using enslaved Black people, who acquired land by killing the native people, who turned around and built the factory farms, the ski and golf resorts, the Amazon warehouses, the coal-fired power plants, the hunting safaris, the gated communities. But they also founded the environmental movement, and in the process, they defended an idea of wilderness romanticized and chauvinized by John Wayne, Cormac McCarthy, Edward Abbey. And until we come clean about that, until my environmentalist friends stop trying to take me down at the Thanksgiving table by telling me that the story I want to write about strong warrior women is irrelevant, uninteresting, and incapable of changing the world, their hands also grip our throats. Last night, I reread Cowboys Are My Weakness. We make a lot of confessions in this book, and one of mine partway through is that I confess that when I read Cowboys Are My Weakness in my 20s, I finished it and threw it against the wall because I didn't want to be that woman, and I was exactly that woman. It is such a saber slicing through the story that is all is well between women and men, that we are enlightened enough to meet each other in bed, in the wilderness, in the halls of Congress, in a dark alleyway, or in the driveway on equal ground. Sadly, that book is as relevant several decades later. Now I see why I threw the book against the wall, because I envied at that young age you had enough of yourself to push back against the lone white male narrative. During those years, I was leading hard climbs, running rescues, and guiding my squad out of wildfires that had turned on us, but I was lost in a story that wasn't my story. That's okay. It's better than living my life trapped in someone else's narrative, a narrative that requires I either die by a man or be saved by a man. I only want a life in which I find my own way before I die wizened and worn out from a life that nearly burst at the end. So full it was with opportunities to speak, ride, dance, wander, teach, learn, love. When Ruby was young, I stole away for a ski on the mountain that presides over our mesa, just the dogs and me. I meant to follow a large open draw, but a herd of mostly pregnant elk cows had bedded down in my path. I skirted them by plunging into thick timber. While I was in the forest, the sky clouded, the wind picked up and covered my tracks. I got totally turned around. It grew late, and there wasn't a landmark to aim for, not even the slant of the sun. The dogs paced in circles. They stared at me, expectant, and I wished then for a guy, a father, a spouse, a bishop, a therapist, someone to show me the way out. The wish was a fleeting one, a kind of flash fiction and an insane one, because what else do you call it when you hand over your agency, your fate, to another person? Men may not ask for directions, and that is another way I've been lost with them. But this is when I looked at Pablo and Ursa, my two crazy cow dogs, and said, go load up. They spun around and headed off in the last direction I would have chosen, but I skied after them, knowing they would obey my command to head for the car and launch themselves through the open hatchback. It was a race in the twilight, but sure enough, we found the vehicle. In dreams, there are not only monsters who want to strangle you, there are dogs who listen when you speak. Carl Jung called them psychopomps, beings that if you are lost and ask for help, will lead you to God. But dogs listen in the woods too, and they'll lead you to safety every time. If home proves to be a place you cannot breathe, the dogs will follow you when you leave that story. So will those velvety herds of elk cows and the forests, the elders and saplings and every tree in between. If the guns come for us, Pam, grab your pen and notebook, your bivy sack, your flint and steel. Climb above tree line on your side of the Great Divide, which is the only thing that should separate our nation during this pandemic. Even if they don't come, head up anyway. I'll meet you there with compass, envelopes, string. We won't go alone. We'll have the dogs. We'll have mentors, students, daughters. We'll have a few good men too who are willing to walk with us, willing perhaps to play supporting characters for a while in the stories that need telling. Let's bring our ballots too. Let's fill them out and tie them to the tails of ravens passing through. Let's climb the ridge lines with the letters we have written and cast them into the clear blue sky. Then let's toss that fucking compass into some deep icy ravine that never sees the light of day, because already we know exactly where we're headed. In fierce and loving sisterhood, Amy. P.S. You have proved to be another one of my favorite animals, and we have yet to meet in person.
And this is not the last letter in its entirety, but most of it. This is May 7th, 2020. Dear Amy, your letter made me think of one of my favorite short stories, Ursula Le Guin's Sir. I wonder if you know it. The story, published in 1982, set in 1909, chronicles a successful all-women expedition to the South Pole, during which, among other things, one of the explorers delivers a baby. The story stays with me because after the women overcome every hardship to finally reach the pole on December 22nd, 1909, and discuss leaving some kind of mark or monument, a snow cairn, a tent pole, or flag, they decide against it because there seemed no particular reason to do so, because anything they were was insignificant in the face of that great landscape. As they get ready to leave the pole and head back to base camp, one woman asks, "Which way?" And another answers, "North." The narrator tells us she is glad they are leaving no marker, for some man longing to be the first might come someday and find it and know then what a fool he had been and break his heart. I love this passage, not only because it explains my whole life to me in the world of wilderness guiding, in the world of publishing, but also for the humor in that one-word answer. If there was an all-women expedition that got to the South Pole before Amundsen's team, I bet they laughed a lot along the way. What I always used to say about my years as a river and hunting and backpacking guide was this: I never wanted to be better than the men at the outdoors. I just wanted to be good enough that they would invite me along, good enough that I could keep up. Ideally, I'd continue. They would forget I was even there. I'm not sure what to even say about this now, given all our letters have covered. Way back in graduate school, in the heyday of deconstruction, I wrote a paper on Jacques Lacan's assertion that women, by virtue of not having a dick, or phallus, as he would have said, understand far better than men the truth of non-possession. The man who taught that class told me during office hours I wasn't smart enough to write the paper, proving more or less Lacan's point. I went ahead and wrote the paper and got an A, a thing that professor was famous for not giving. The same man, after Cowboys Are My Weakness came out, told me I was glorifying an archaic form of masculinity. I noted, internally only, that he was an archaic form of masculinity himself. Sir is a story that is precisely about women understanding the truth of non-possession. The environmental movement, in its purest and most effective form, must be about the same. Your silence will not protect you, Audre Lorde says from the front of a t-shirt I have worn until it is threadbare, when I am not wearing the other one with a quote from Lydia Yuknavitch, "I am not the story you made of me." 2 days after my mother gave birth to me by cesarean, she wanted to go to a party. She was still in the hospital, but a little invasive surgery never kept my mother from a good time. She wheeled herself down to the maternity ward bulletin board and got Martha Washington's name off the list dedicated to newborn babysitting. Martha came to the hospital and watched me that night, miraculously fell in love with me, and didn't really leave until she died when I was 20. Martha taught me to swim, read, ride a bike, to hold open doors for my elders. She taught me generosity is its own reward, and that the failure of imagination has caused a scourge upon the earth. Most importantly, she taught me to always, always say yes to the world. This morning on the dog walk, I realized the thing I am afraid of, far more than I am afraid of dying a breathless COVID death, far more than being shot in the face by a camo wearing MAGA dude, is becoming a person who says no to the world. Becoming a person who doesn't go out or hike out or speak out because prudence and my survival instincts tell me I should not. That would be the bad guys winning. That would be the bad guys winning most of all. I can't say yes right now to a trek in Bhutan or a teaching a writing class on a raft trip down the Dolores, or a march to protect women's access to contraception. But I can say yes to the tiny mountain ball cactus blooming near my clothesline. I can say yes to Lime Creek running over its banks too early, too quickly, but braiding itself elegantly and generously quenching my pasture. I can say yes to my students, who I only see via Zoom these days, but who are still writing their stories like their lives depend on it, because if we don't know by now that they do, we are definitely not paying attention. I can say yes to a horse named Ben, a thoroughbred paint cross, a big boy, 16'3" and broad as a boat, dark bay with a shoulder that looks like somebody threw a bucket of white paint at it. Ben needs a new home, and I need something to say yes to, so he will arrive on the 1st of June. I can say yes to these letters, which are sustaining beyond all reason, except the reason we keep sending them across the mountains, these mountains that belong to everybody and nobody, and mostly to themselves. This administration can take so many things away from us: our safety, our healthcare, our independence, our contraceptives, our freedom of movement, our livelihoods, our clean air and water, and inevitably, probably sooner than later, our right to speak. But it cannot keep us from saying yes to the world. Whether this pandemic lasts for 1 year or 3 or a decade, we will emerge knowing far better what we need to survive. Even now, I can see the pencil scratching through item after item: airplane travel, hipster coffee, Wilco concert, baseball. What remains? Air, water, horses, elk cows, ravens, and dogs. We have not one single thing to lose by believing even now that we can build the world we want to live in, and we must, because time is short and inaction is death. Fighting for the earth and each other will be the only way to feel how alive we still are. So let's save the post office. Let's win the election. Let's win all the elections. Let's downshift and tap into the power I know you know we have, the strength we feel when we put our feet on hard dirt or words on these pages. Let's tend to the weary, the grieving, the hungry, to all those the system is rigged against. The earth is our ally. She always has been. She understands the truth of non-possession. In fact, she wrote the book on it. Thank you for these letters, Amy. I hope there will be 1,000 more. I will walk now to the back of my property where the wetland is overflowing, breathe the clean air, and wait with a piece of string and this letter. Here I am now, my eyes trained on the ridgeline to the west. In everlasting sisterhood, Pam.
So before you say anything, I have to make a confession that I probably would only make in Moab. I realized in the middle of the reading that I can't see and my prescription glasses and 2 different strengths of glasses no longer work. And it's been getting worse over the entire book tour this month. And I have been putting off going to the eye doctor because it's COVID. And I just realized in the middle of the reading tonight that I was trying to remember it because I can't read the damn words. So I hope it was coherent, but I'm really glad to know. And I'm sorry you guys had to suffer through stumbling, but it's good to know my memory still works.
It was completely fluid and wonderful. And in fact, I guess I would have to say confluid. I love the braiding through time and place. If you've tuned in late, you're listening to a wonderful thing that was inevitable, but they didn't even know it. Inevitable that these two would meet and that they would discover all of the places where the warp and the weft of fate and chance took them into everlasting sisterhood, and concurrently made it safe for me to have my own thoughts. So intimate and so honest, because they were just letters that were just saying it from the heart. that it made it safe. And I didn't even realize that I didn't feel completely safe to have my own thoughts until I felt safe reading them with you.
Wow.
So I think that the letters have succeeded in opening up greater permission for intimacy and to be fierce and true, because if not now, when? I got that very strongly from the both of you. And as I said, they might have been even called life raft letters for all of the lift they gave me in moments of isolation, feeling connected. And I know from looking at all of the chat comments and seeing people's responses, they feel the same way. So first of all, thank you again. There's a friend of mine named Caroline Casey. You might even know her. She's a radio person and a writer, and she calls it hyper yang death frenzy.
This thing we're in. This
It
thing we're in.
the hyper yang death frenzy.
Mhm.
And I thought of her also with your book, and making it possible to kind of make it safe to self out dirty secrets. You talked about that in the book. Oh, I have a dirty secret I could tell. And there was something writerly about it, but also girl friendly about it. Like, okay, I'll tell you the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Very brave thing to do, especially at this time. You made mention, Amy, of the fact that you were going to get some malignant feedback, some toxic reply, people that you were pinning or people that identified with that. And I'm wondering if this has been so, and how did you handle it? With typical ferocity? How's it gone?
I think Pam and I are used to getting a lot of threats and some backlash for our work. And we both live in communities that are largely Trump supporters. And so that feels a little weird. But we have had about one guy walk out of every live reading. But courteously, it wasn't like he stormed out or shook his fist or anything. And one woman, which Pam said, well, maybe she just started dating a climber and doesn't want to. And but I think the thing that has been the most exciting is how much people have actually responded, men and women alike. But the women come up afterwards and they buy 5 to 10 books. They're like, I've got to give this to every girlfriend or my book club or my daughters and my nieces or my sisters. And the excitement, it was just so palpable and so obvious in this stack of books that they wanted to have signed. So I think it has felt more inspiring and invigorating and promising than we had hoped.
Do you want to tell the story of your friend who wrote you the letter? Because I just think that's an important story about what women maybe are going to be doing now.
Yeah. So word got out that this was becoming a book, that this Orion letter writing piece had been expanded and was becoming a book. And I got a letter from an older, well-known environmental writer that I love and respect. And he said, well, this is a quaint project and that's great, but I think you need to get back to your real writing. And I think that you two like each other too much for this to really hold as a book because there's no real dramatic tension. And and so I wrote back and I said, well, that's cute that you say that. But to us, it feels important and we'll just see, like maybe it'll create its own weather. We don't know, but it feels really important. And the response has reflected that. But I also said, there's enough dramatic tension out there. Like we're kind of, this became about sisterhood and solidarity. And this became about, revisioning the world as this old one crumbles into ash. Like, what do we want it to look like now? So that has to be a unified effort. Why we would ever think of debating one another in these letters is really never entered our minds.
It just shows how much we become conditioned to do that with one another. It can be surprising, just this self-revelatory, just the letters. I also heard you speak also about how someone told you, nobody even writes letters anymore. Who's going to be interested in reading these letters in this form? And what I found is a voracious appetite for it. I was sentimentally moved by just the, hey, Amy, hey, Pam. It was so human. I almost, speaking of good humans, Eduardo Brummel to all panelists says, Pam and Amy, any surprises during the letter writings? As in, holy buckets, did I really just say that? Is that what I actually think or believe? Did it come out of your mouth and was revelatory in that way? Any surprises?
You know, I was thinking about that because I saw the question in the chat. And I was thinking about the answer to that. And there wasn't like a moment where I went, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or God, is that really true? But I think the bigger thing that I have come to, and maybe it wasn't even just in the writing, but it was something about the writing and then going on tour and seeing people live at a time when no one's seeing anyone. And you know, we joke about this, but like we show up somewhere like Aspen or Telluride, and you know, there's however many women and men who were allowed to come, you know, which was usually like 30 or 35 or something at the most. We were all outside and masked, and sometimes it was cold, so we were all in our parkas, and sometimes ash from the fires was raining down on us. And so people would arrive and they'd be like, oh, cool, wine, you know? And then, you know, like they would leave going, you know, fuck the patriarchy. So like watching this happen, you know, watching these people who are, you know, granted, like we are, insulated by their own whiteness and their own privilege and their own good fortune, and in many cases, not, of course, not generalizing to everyone who was in every audience, but you know that, and to then realize that this is their battle, like no one's going to fight this battle for us if we don't fight it. And so anyway, that is all a way of saying what I really have realized, and this sounds grandiose and I don't mean it to, but I really, there's this one letter where I'm talking about getting shot off the back of a horse, because we're talking about like mounting the Mongolian war horses and riding into battle. And I'm saying, well, that actually would be a pretty good way to die, like to be shot off the back of a horse, you know, with a big heart, like, and you know, I sort of laugh about it. I say, well, if I'm having like horseback death fantasies, it's probably time to say goodnight. But in a much more serious way, I think the surprise is that I really am ready to die for the earth, you know, like I really am. I'm 58 years old. I had 40 amazing years between the tyranny of my father's house, which I talk about in the book, and the tyranny of the Trump administration. And I mean, I don't expect to die and I don't want to die, but it wouldn't be the worst thing to die fighting for democracy. I saw a woman who'd written another book posted that on Twitter, and I thought, that's right. Wouldn't be the worst way to go, fighting against fascism in 2020 in the United States of America, you know. And that probably sounds grand and probably people are rolling their eyes, but I think, and you know, absolutely entitled to roll your eyes because you know, but I feel, because of my father, I feel well equipped for this fight. And because of talking with Amy all year, I feel motivated for this fight, and up for it, I guess, is really what I want to say. Whatever that looks like going forward. And, you know, 7 days from now, we're going to have a slightly better idea of what that's going to look like, but only a slightly better idea. Because even if everything goes great next week, we have a massive fight on our hands just to keep breathing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that that we realized was, wow, if one of us had tried to write this book alone and then gone on tour alone in this particular context, in this world, I mean, we were dodging the northern Colorado fires and like coming up out of Boulder and up into Rocky Mountain National Park, and these fires were the scariest thing I've ever seen. And then we get to our next stay in Granby, and there's a new fire coming, but it's, you know, it's miles away and nobody's worried about it. But we are like giving a reading out in the cold, and all you can see is people's eyes because they're bundled and they're masked. And we're signing books with ash raining down on the pages. And the next day we leave, and they close the road and people are evacuated because the fire came so fast. And so, but we just, like, there were so many ways that being together in this was really helpful. I think we've all been so isolated and divided, and I think that sort of helped prepare us too. Like, we're ready for this. I know that Ruby's father was like, well, why are you doing this? Like, this is, you know, if you're worried, I mean, what about Ruby? And I said, what about Ruby? What world will she have? You know, I'm fighting for Ruby, like, so that she has air to breathe and she has water to drink and that she can have agency over her own damn body. These things actually really matter. And this is the fight we're in. It's that serious. So we kind of like sharpened the knives and swords while we were writing.
Mhm. Well, and it carved some open space for deep contemplation and connection, and the way that you're always able to make the point about the kind of oracular, animate nature of the natural world, I just relish. And I imagine everybody here this evening just loves it from both of you. So thanks for being so with your place and in your bodies to be able to tell it true. I noticed, in fact, speaking of place, you know, that Pam, you mentioned it, that you had seen sort of a, a marked lack of, let me see if I can find it, fewer and fewer students, especially at UC Davis, took a real interest in the natural world, fewer of them going backpacking, even defining the nouns that made your heart beat fast, like elk, mesa, trilobite, eddy. And, you know, I myself have asked maybe, oh, I don't know, a lot of people in my time doing radio about how this place or whatever place they're from has shaped them. And it has always surprised me how few people even know what I'm talking about when I talk about the effect of a place on them or the effect of them on the place. There's this gap or some kind of vacancy about being aware, even of their surroundings. And I wondered if either one of you might riff upon that regarding place and what you think accounts for this sort of gap.
Yeah, I mean, I can say a couple of things. I mean, I don't know what account. I mean, of course, the screens, you know, like these screens that are allowing us to have this conversation are also the problem. That's what's creating the gap, and we all know that. The electronicized world is at least one thing that's creating the gap. But I would say just two things that I think of right off the top of my head. And one thing for me is that, you know, and this is particular to me, though I'm not unique in it. I was raised by the natural world and by the Colorado Plateau in particular, the larger Colorado Plateau, if you think of that in the biggest sense. And like, it mothered me, you know. I came out here, and before that, the Jersey Shore did, you know, that's pretty lowbrow, but I would leave the shore after like my week there in the summer and the beauty there. And I would stand at the edge of the water and say goodbye to every wave, you know, when I was 6 years old. Like, I had a sense from the youngest age that I was being mothered and honestly loved, if you'll allow me to say that, by the natural world. in the absence of other parenting. So for me, it is like protecting my mother. I used to have a boyfriend who said he would never shoot anybody unless they tried to kill his mother. And that's how I feel exactly, except about Mother Earth, you know? And so I don't know why other people don't have that. You know, I had it instantly, even though I lived in the most boring suburban place. You know, my life was going into the little tiny remnant woods and playing horse. I know it. I know there's a lot of us out there, but you know, I didn't live anywhere beautiful. I grew up in like Eastern Pennsylvania, and the closest beauty was the Jersey Shore, which is beautiful in its own way. I know nobody out here thinks so, but it is. And so I found it, even though I wasn't born, you know, looking at Half Dome. I found the natural world and I loved it, and it loved me back. And I would kill for it, you know, or die for it. The other thing I was going to say, I forgot the other thing I was going to say. Amy, if you talk, maybe I'll remember.
This is a problem with two women in their 50s writing a book. We forget things when we go to speak. You know, what I want to say about that is that I can't really distinguish my identity or my thoughts or my experience without it somehow being completely enmeshed in the landscape, grafted onto the landscape. And but what I learned as I grew up, and I think I even struggled with this in writing Trespass, was that it was still a very male identified way of being in the natural world. And I think a lot of that is attributed to growing up in Utah with in a ranching family, Mormon roots, that kind of thing. There was a lot of sort of possession of the land, to speak to Pam's referring to Lacan's non-possession. This was very much about possession of the land. But I still did learn to love it. I think when I grew up, though, what the land taught me was that there was something female that was missing, that's missing in everything, of course, at this point. And that where I remember my women's studies professor at the University of Utah in a paper told me, crossed out, I had written Mother Earth or Mother Nature. And she's like, don't you ever do that. That we don't do that. It's derogatory and it just reinforces the mother stereotype. And I'm like, but I want it to be a female body. We have so many masculine patriarchal structures, and this is a body that gets used and abused. And so that was sort of a coming of age for me in that perspective when I wrote Desert Cabal, which is why it was so important for me. So that's, I don't know if that helps you remember what you were going to say, Pam.
It doesn't, but I thought of something else. And it's, you know, we're in such a moment here in the West right now because, you know, we've all been saying, you know, wilderness is what makes us human. And like, there's been the environmental movement, and then there's been, you know, climate change. And those two things have not always been the same thing. You know, there's like wilderness for wilderness' sake, and let's have hiking trails, and let's ban, you know, four-wheelers or whatever. But then there's the fact that, you know, we are in climate free fall, and those two worlds have not necessarily, you know, come together. Well, now they are, you know, like now they are. Like now, I mean, I don't mean the bodies and the humans that run these organizations. I just mean, you know, there's a lot of people who don't care at all about hiking, who don't want their whole towns to burn down, or want their children not to have asthma attacks, or, you know, don't want their city to be flooded. Like we're here at this moment where the environment, where everyone has to pay attention to it, certainly in the West, because, you know, of what Amy and I saw over the last 7 days of driving around. It was as if we were igniting fires with our tailpipe. Like they were starting everywhere we went.
The word inflammation in general, such a blanket term for what we are experiencing. So for future people that may be listening, what was it like then? It was hot in the oven.
Well, and we were always talking about breathing in this book, and not intentionally. Like we would we were talking about, being able to breathe and the COVID victims, and we had both had it almost assuredly before there was even a case announced in this country. I had it in February and Amy had it before that. And, we're still trying to catch our breath. Like we're still trying to, speaking of inflammation, like we're still trying to breathe and to get our hearts right and all of that. But then there was George Floyd, and I mean, and then there was, the fact that the sky was clear. There was that Forbes headline, 70,000 people in China didn't die because of the 5 weeks that there weren't any cars on the roads, because the air got cleaner, and it's like, what exactly are we doing? Like there's a line in the book where it was right when they said that a lot of people near highways were dying more of COVID in the tri-state area because of Roundup being in gasoline and therefore being in car exhaust. Like, I mean, if there's one thing we've known forever, it's that Roundup kills people. So like, why would we rather die than have weeds? Like we have, like all these things are going to come together because stuff is going to keep catching on fire and flooding and all the other things. And we're going to have to look at the big picture in a way that we're so bad at, We're going to have to look at the whole ecosystem.
You've really helped zoom it all the way back and help people fall right into the little envelope of care that extends past your relationship. So once again, I thank you so much. We're here at about 7:52, and I want to make sure that the wonderful audience gets plenty of shine. We have a couple of people that are interested in one way or another in your future and how this informs what comes next for you. So take it, plug your works. What's next for you?
Well, we can't wait to get back to writing letters. In fact, I'm due for one this week. So much has happened, and the letters are really the way we sort of take a breath and make sense of it in terms of our own lives and sort of pull ourselves back together and face the new reality, which has changed and worsened since the last 24 hours. And also something miraculous always happens, like also like feeding off of that and sharing it and rejoicing in it and like wondering how we can also create miracles of change. And so we're excited to get back to writing. It feels important to chronicle the election and the aftermath. And even if the stars align and things magically go our way, meaning people who care about women and people of color and Native communities and the earth will actually be voted in to help us turn things around. Even if that happens, it's still going to be incredibly messy. And then we still have to deal with climate change. And here in the Southwest, the issues of water and air quality and food, really, I mean, and jobs, I mean, all of it is related. And so we have all that. We have we're never going back to what we had. And it's like, that seems so scary and dark and dystopian. And it also, as my smart husband likes to say, it's the chemotherapy we needed for the cancer. Like it's part of the healing. It's part of getting rid of literally the inflammation, which causes cancer, right?
It's sort of how I took your letters. I was like, this is alkalinizing myself. There's something that's sort of putting out the fire at the same time as I'm feeling kind of empowered to act, I guess, or inspired. So I hope everybody that's here that hasn't had a chance to partake in the exchange of airmail letters between Pam Houston and Amy Irvine gets a chance to do it. Now here locally, easy to do. You just go to Back of Beyond Books and say, hey, Andy, or whoever happens to be there at that time. Where's it located?
And it was harder in getting the book signed there. Like we were on the end of this leg of the last leg of the live tour and racing to get to Moab on a Sunday over that teacher's weekend or whatever. It was absolute madness. And
NEA was nuts in Moab this year.
insane. The traffic was backed up coming into Spanish Fork onto the Wasatch Front all the way up to Soldier Summit, like bumper to bumper, unimaginable. I never imagined it would be like that in my lifetime. But we're texting Andy, he's not even home. He's been out of the office for a week, and we're texting him, and he's texting Marcy, and he's texting Carter at the store. And we're trying to get there in some fashion around everybody's schedules to get these books signed. And we were so ragged around the edges at this point, and we have people out on the street. We're standing there trying to figure out, we were supposed to leave him and went in the neighboring stores, and the woman didn't know what we were talking about, and we're standing there trying to figure it out, and all these people are walking by without masks and yelling, and we had sort of a meltdown, actually. So the books may have our own tears on them, and but they're there. We finally got out of town and ended up handing them off to Marcy out at the Shell station on our way back to Colorado. And I really, on that note, I would love to say, please, everybody, please support Back of Beyond Books. It, as Pam likes to say, is one of the last bastions to halt fascism. And we are in the midst of an attempted coup. We need to keep that bookstore alive. We need to keep independent booksellers and presses and writers going, because this is how we keep democracy alive.
Thank you for making it so participatory. Yes, total thumbs up from everybody in the audience. What psychic lube of transitional grace you have brought to everybody here. Thanks for putting it out there for us once again. We want to also shout out, don't we, the intrepid women at Torrey House Press. We can't let the evening go without saying Kirsten Joanna Allen, Kathleen Metcalf, Anna Terashima, Rachel Bakakane, Michelle Wentling, who said yes to every word. We thank you, Torrey House Press. Please keep it coming.
Also, our beautiful cover artist, our cover art, Claire Taylor, another Utah artist who made those ravens carrying the letters, and also gave Amy and I each our own bird. I am the belted kingfisher, and Amy is the Stellar's jay. Every time we swap letters. And that's all Claire Taylor, who's a fantastic artist.
Yeah. Thank you also for that, Claire. All the little birdies on the wire be like, we love you. That's the truth. I think at this point, what are we? Yeah, we're almost at the end. Are there some more? Yes, Torrey House Press rocks. Lots of love coming your way. I don't know that I have anything else except major thanks. Maybe one last thing for the future generations. I love that, to think long. The one P word that you didn't put in your title, too much alliteration, I guess, was parenting. And I noticed that the parenting of the future generations and the parenting care, this sort of necessary caretaking economy that you're cultivating through these conversations, had a wonderful little story in your daughter Ruby, and it illustrated how fiercely and easily they take care of business. Would you mind closing with this sweetness of Ruby's?
Do you know where it is? Do you have the page number?
I don't. You could just tell it sort of.
Okay. That's better, because I need to get new glasses before the next reading, because I can't read very well.
You just remember the story.
Yeah, so right when the pandemic started, of course, my Mormon genes kicked in, and I started stocking the pantry. Devin built me shelves, and I was ordering stuff and buying stuff and talking to it. We have a wonderful little local food hub co-op here, like you have Moonflower and Moab, and so they were great about bringing in cases and that kind of thing. So I'm doing all this online, and Ruby's like, "What are you doing?" And I explained it, and she was like, "Wow." So she opens up her computer and she starts typing away, and then she sends me a list. And she's gone on some of the doomsday prepper sites with the like big, 25 pounds of things that last for 75 years. And she's made a list of all the sweet treats that they sell. And the whole list was titled Desserts for the Apocalypse. And yeah, that was like her entree into the pandemic. And she's ready. She doesn't like it, but she's ready. She's ready to do what we need to do to save the planet and save each other. I think in some ways she will be a far better steward than we have been. She's pretty fierce about it.
The quality I love the most, to be able to shed that light with some aim and some heart. Yes. Yeah. So then all our love from this edition of Tuesdays with the Museum. Pam, Amy, love you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christy.
The next one's also going to be rocking. It is an event, a great rare film screening that you really don't want to miss. I'm going to see if I can give you the full pick of it. A kiss goodbye from me. First, where is it? Let's see if this does it. Ah, yes. It is a screening of My Canyonlands, The Adventurous Life of Kent Frost. And Kent Frost, so critical around Canyonlands, an amazing character, be featuring a special guest in the nephew of Kent Frost, which is Kent's nephew. It's November 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Yes, does the date ring a bell to you? Yeah. Election day. Make it happen. Make it history. And then if you need something else to focus on, think about the big picture with a screening of My Canyonlands. Zoom and Facebook Live. And I'm Christy saying thanks again. Everybody, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Everybody take care out there. Hope to see you soon.
Vote.
Vote. Vote. And be a poll watcher if you live in a red place.
And buy books from Back of Beyond.
Yep. Buy books from Back of Beyond.
And be fierce.
Don't take any shit.